The voicemail came while I was selecting fabric swatches for a client's library renovation. I barely glanced at my phone, expecting another scheduling update, but the name flashing across the screen made my stomach clench. Mother. I hesitated before pressing play, already bracing for whatever verdict she was about to deliver. Madeline, it's Mom. Just letting you know, we're keeping Thanksgiving small this year. We think it might be best if you and Daniel take the kids somewhere else for the holiday. Things have been strained lately. Everyone needs a break from the tension. Call me back. The words slipped through the speaker in her perfectly measured, rehearsed tone, the same tone she used when announcing decisions that had been thoroughly discussed behind closed doors. Not a conversation, a decree, final, non-negotiable. I sat there frozen, one hand still hovering over a roll of deep blue velvet. Somewhere in the distance, a clock chimed, marking the moment everything shifted again. For a long minute, I didn't move. I just stared at the phone, as if somehow the message would change if I gave it enough time. But it didn't. The message wasn't a surprise, not really. It was a confirmation, a quiet, brutal confirmation of a truth I had tried too long to ignore. Take the kids somewhere else. Translation: you're not welcome. Thanksgiving had always been the one unshakable tradition in our family, the immovable pillar around which every chaotic year revolved. No matter how messy life got, Thanksgiving was sacred. And now, for the first time in my life, I was being pushed out of it like an unwelcome guest. My throat tightened. I replayed the message, hoping, idiotically, that I had misunderstood. But no. Her words were clear, clipped, and devastatingly familiar. The heavy velvet fabric slipped from my hands and landed on the floor with a muted thud. I barely noticed. My mind was already elsewhere, drifting back to the conversation I'd overheard a month ago at Jack's birthday party. Vanessa's voice, sharp and smug, had carried across the room to where I stood pretending not to listen. Who needs 6 bedrooms and a library? It's excessive. She's just trying to make the rest of us feel small. I hadn't said anything then. I had just smiled tightly, tucked the hurt away, and told myself it didn't matter. Family was messy. Family was complicated. You swallowed the small slights for the sake of peace, until the slights weren't small anymore. My phone buzzed again. A text from Daniel. Meeting running late. Can you grab the kids at 4? I stared at the screen for a beat before typing a quick reply. Of course. Appreciate you. A simple exchange, ordinary, but it anchored me. Daniel saw me, appreciated me, loved me without conditions. I clung to that thought as I stood up, brushed off my skirt, and gathered the scattered fabric samples with shaking hands. I inhaled deeply, the air catching sharp and cold in my lungs. Enough. I wasn't going to call her back. I wasn't going to argue or beg or pretend I didn't hear what she really meant. I would respond, just not in the way she expected. Opening my contact list, I scrolled to her name and composed a message. Got your message. Hope you all have a nice holiday. 6 words. No anger. No pleading. No justification. Just an acknowledgement and a release. Then I opened a blank note on my phone and started making a list. A guest list. A menu. A shopping list. If they didn't want me at their table, I would build my own, and it would be magnificent. The house was still when I got home. Afternoon light slanted through the windows, painting long golden stripes across the hardwood floors. For a moment, I just stood there, keys dangling from my hand, staring at the life Daniel and I had built, and wondering how I had spent so many years trying to earn a place at a table that had no seat for me. Thanksgiving. Small. Best if you go somewhere else. The words repeated in my head like a cruel lullaby, trying to rock me back into that old, familiar guilt. Maybe you overreacted, Madeline. Maybe you are difficult. Maybe you should just call and apologize. No, not this time. I set down my bag, pulled out my phone, and opened my contacts again. But this time I wasn't looking for my mother's name. I scrolled until I found Uncle Henry. It rang only twice before he answered, his voice warm and surprised. Madeline. What a nice midweek call. Everything okay? I smiled despite myself, the first real smile since the voicemail. Actually, Uncle Henry, I was wondering if you and Aunt June might like to join us for Thanksgiving at our place this year. We're putting together a little gathering. There was a pause and then a delighted laugh. Wouldn't miss it for the world, sweetheart. I ended the call feeling lighter than I had all week. One invitation down, many more to go. Over the next hour, I made more calls and sent more messages. Close friends, Daniel's cousins who lived nearby, a few neighbors we adored but never had a chance to host properly. Each yes added a small spark to my chest, building a fire where the cold emptiness had been. By the time Daniel walked through the door, juggling briefcase and grocery bags, I had a full list, a draft menu, and 3 new Pinterest boards titled Thanksgiving Renaissance, Tables, Capes of Glory, and stuffing ideas that would make Martha Stewart cry. He set the bags down and kissed me lightly on the forehead. Busy day? You could say that, I said, smiling. We're hosting Thanksgiving. Daniel blinked. We are. Yep. Decided it about an hour ago. He paused, reading my face carefully the way he always did when he knew there was a deeper story. But instead of pushing, he just wrapped his arms around me and said, "Sounds perfect." I pressed my face into his chest, breathing him in, the scent of fresh air and coffee and something uniquely him. This was home, not a house, not a table owned by people who measured love by obedience, but this steady, simple, fierce love that asked for nothing but my happiness. Later that night, after the kids were in bed and the house was quiet again, I sat at the kitchen island sketching out a rough seating plan while Daniel scrolled through recipes beside me. My phone buzzed. Vanessa. I almost didn't look, but curiosity, or maybe the last tattered thread of old habits, made me check. Honestly, Mads, everything doesn't have to be so dramatic. Just apologize so we can all move on. I stared at the screen, feeling the familiar cocktail of anger and sadness swirl in my gut. It was always my responsibility, wasn't it? Always my job to smooth things over, to swallow my hurt, to apologize for being hurt in the first place. I typed and deleted 3 different responses before settling on the only one that felt true. I'm not being dramatic. I'm respecting Mom's decision and making alternative plans. Have a nice holiday. I hit send, my hand surprisingly steady. Her reply came almost instantly. This is exactly why you weren't invited. You're so difficult now. Difficult. The word hung in the air like smoke. For a long time, I believed it. I believed I was the problem. The one who loved too much, cared too loudly, questioned too often. But sitting there with Daniel at my side and the quiet hum of our home around me, I realized the truth. I wasn't difficult. I was just no longer willing to shrink myself to fit inside their expectations. And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel sad about that at all. The next morning dawned cool and bright, a rare crispness in the savanna air that made the old oak trees outside shimmer with a kind of muted gold. I woke earlier than usual, slipping out of bed without waking Daniel, and padded barefoot to the kitchen. The lists I had made the night before were spread out across the counter, a road map of hope scrawled in my own hurried handwriting. Guest list, grocery list, task list. It looked ambitious. It looked overwhelming. And it looked exactly like freedom. I poured a cup of coffee and sat down, tapping my pen thoughtfully against the side of the mug. How many times had I bent over backward, trying to keep the peace? How many holidays spent biting my tongue, forcing smiles, pretending slights hadn't cut so deep? Not this year. This year, I would not apologize for existing. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of activity. Daniel and I divided tasks like the practice team we were. He handled the grocery run with Ethan, while Sophia and I tackled the first wave of cleaning and decorating. There was laughter in the air as Sophia carefully arranged mini pumpkins along the banister, her face serious with concentration. "This looks like a magazine house, Mommy," she said proudly. I smiled and kissed the top of her head. "It's because you helped, sweetheart." By noon, the house had started its transformation. The big dining room, with its soaring ceilings and salvaged wood beams, came alive under our hands. I pulled out the good china we had inherited from Daniel's grandmother, polished the silverware, and laid out deep navy and burnt orange linens that made the long farmhouse table look regal without being stiff. There was no sterile perfection here, no cold scrutiny, only warmth, only welcome. Uncle Henry arrived in the early afternoon, his truck pulling up the winding drive with a familiar rumble. He stepped out carrying a battered cooler and an even more battered smile, looking around at the manor with genuine awe. "Madeline, you've outdone yourself," he said, whistling low. "She's beautiful." "She is," I agreed, meaning not just the house, but the life we had rebuilt inside her. He hugged me fiercely, the kind of hug that makes you feel seen in a way words never could. As he lugged the cooler toward the kitchen, my phone buzzed again. "Mother." I stared at the screen for a long second before hitting ignore. Whatever she wanted to say could wait, or maybe didn't need to be said at all. Daniel found me standing there, phone still in hand, a strange sadness creeping up my spine. He didn't ask. He just wrapped his arms around me from behind and pressed a kiss to my temple. "They're the ones missing out," he murmured. I nodded, the lump in my throat too large to speak around. Later, while making test batches of dinner rolls, Sophia's little voice broke the comfortable kitchen chatter. "Mommy, will Grandma and Grandpa come too?" I froze, a smear of flour trailing forgotten across the marble counter. "I don't think so this year, sweetheart," I said carefully. Her brow furrowed. "Because they're mad at you?" Daniel shot me a sympathetic look over Sophia's head. I crouched down to her level, brushing a stray curl behind her ear. "Sometimes grown-ups have disagreements," I said gently, "but that doesn't mean they don't love you. And it doesn't mean we can't have a wonderful Thanksgiving here with all the people who love us." Sophia considered this solemnly before nodding. "Can I make place cards for everybody?" "That's a wonderful idea," I said, pulling her into a flour-dusted hug. As she scampered off to gather markers and paper, Daniel leaned against the counter, watching me. "You okay?" I thought about it, really thought about it. "I think so," I said, surprised at the truth of it. Maybe being difficult just meant refusing to pretend anymore. Maybe it meant choosing peace over permission, joy over duty, love over obligation. And for the first time in a long, long while, I wasn't afraid of that at all. The morning of Thanksgiving arrived in a hush of golden light. The old oak trees lining the drive stood half bare, their fallen leaves carpeting the ground in shades of amber and copper. The manor, usually stately and reserved, seemed almost to hum with quiet anticipation. I had been awake for hours already, moving through the house in a kind of purposeful rhythm that made the nerves settle and the heart steady. The turkey was brining, the pies cooling on wire racks, the side dishes prepped and ready for the oven. Sophia's place cards were laid carefully on each plate, her careful, looping handwriting spelling out names with all the gravity of a royal decree. Daniel found me in the kitchen, barefoot and slightly flour-dusted, as I arranged a centerpiece of magnolia leaves and white candles down the center of the dining table. "Smells amazing in here," he said, kissing my forehead. "And you look radiant." I laughed, a little breathless. "I feel peaceful." He smiled at that, and it felt like the most astonishing thing. Peace, not performance, not walking on eggshells, just peace. By mid-morning, the house began to fill with the sounds of life. Uncle Henry arrived first, carrying a massive tureen of his famous gumbo and a box of fresh pies. Then came Daniel's cousins, arms full of wine bottles and casserole dishes. Friends trickled in next, each one greeted with hugs and exclamations, shedding coats and stories as they crossed the threshold. The house bloomed with laughter and warmth, music low in the background, children darting between adults with the giddy, sugared energy only holidays seemed to produce. As I basted the turkey one last time, my heart felt fuller than it had in years. This was what family could be, should be. I was pulling the rolls from the oven, golden, fragrant, perfect when the doorbell rang again. Assuming it was Tyler and Michael, Daniel's cousins, who had texted that they were running late, I wiped my hands on a towel and hurried to answer it. But when I opened the door, it wasn't Tyler and Michael standing there. It was my parents. For a moment, I just stood there, blinking at them. The world seemed to narrow to the three of us, the festive sounds of the party dimming behind me like a radio dialed too low. My father shifted awkwardly, hand shoved deep into the pockets of his overcoat. My mother clutched her purse tightly in front of her, her expression a strained mix of defiance and uncertainty. "Happy Thanksgiving, Madeline," my father said finally, his voice rough. I stepped aside without a word, letting them in. They moved cautiously, as if the house itself might judge them. Their eyes skimmed over the soaring ceilings, the gleaming floors, the carefully restored moldings, but they said nothing. Daniel appeared at my side, his hand warm at the small of my back, steadying me. "We're just about to sit down," he said smoothly, bridging the awkwardness with the kind of grace that still sometimes left me breathless with gratitude. Sophia, spotting her grandparents, let out a delighted squeal and ran to hug them. My mother crouched stiffly to receive her, smoothing Sophia's hair with a trembling hand. There was no grand apology, no outpouring of regrets, just presence, hesitant, awkward, but present nonetheless. And somehow that was enough for now. Nathan carved the turkey with ceremonial precision, dishing out plates heavy with mashed potatoes, green beans, and stuffing. Uncle Henry raised his glass in a small, quiet toast to chosen families and new beginnings, and I felt something loosen in my chest. We sat, we ate, we laughed, though the laughter around my parents was thinner, stretched tight like a bridge over uncertain waters. But it was okay, because looking around the table at the mix of friends and family, old ties and new bonds, I realized something simple but profound. I wasn't sitting at their table anymore, begging for scraps of love. I was sitting at mine. The sun was low in the sky when I found myself on the back porch, a sweater pulled around my shoulders against the gathering chill. The last streaks of daylight stretched across the lake beyond the lawn, turning the water into a sheet of molten gold. I wasn't alone. My mother stood beside me, her arms folded tight across her chest, her gaze fixed somewhere out in the distance. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The clatter and murmur of the house carried faintly through the glass door behind us, a world apart. I thought about retreating, about leaving the silence unbroken and returning to the safe warmth inside. But something rooted me to the spot, a stubbornness, maybe, or something closer to hope. "It's beautiful here," she said finally, her voice so soft I almost missed it. I nodded, wrapping my arms tighter around myself. "We worked hard for it." A long pause. "I can see that," she said, and there was a note in her voice I couldn't quite identify. Regret, maybe, or pride, reluctant and raw. I watched a leaf drift lazily from a branch overhead, twisting and turning as it fell to the ground. Change wasn't sudden, I realized. It was slow, incremental, 1,000 small shifts before the whole landscape was different. "This doesn't fix everything," I said, quietly, surprising even myself with the honesty of it. "I know," she murmured, her eyes still on the lake. "Decades of patterns. They don't disappear in a day," I added, more to the sky than to her. "No," she agreed, her voice rougher now. "But it's a start." I turned my head then, really looking at her. There were lines around her eyes I hadn't noticed before, a weary set to her shoulders that hadn't always been there. She wasn't the immovable monolith I had spent my childhood trying to scale. She was just a woman, shaped and worn down by her own regrets and fears. For the first time, I didn't feel anger when I looked at her. I just felt sad. Sad for all the years lost to misunderstanding. Sad for the walls built out of pride and fear that had kept us both isolated when we had needed each other most. The wind picked up, scattering the last of the leaves across the porch. My mother shivered slightly and hugged her arms tighter. "We should go inside," she said. I nodded, but neither of us moved right away. We stood there a little longer, suspended in the fragile truce of the moment, neither ready to break it just yet. Finally, she reached out, a tentative, awkward gesture, and touched my arm. "Thank you for letting us come," she said. I swallowed hard, emotion catching me off guard. "I'm glad you did." She smiled then. Not the brittle, polite smile I had seen so often, but something smaller, quieter, more real. It wasn't everything. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation, or a magic erasure of all the pain, but it was something. And sometimes something is enough to build on. As we stepped back inside, the warmth of the house enveloped us, the smells of cinnamon and roast turkey wrapping around me like a familiar blanket. Daniel caught my eye from across the room, his expression questioning. I nodded once, a small smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. A start. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was a beginning. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like more than enough. The evening wound down slowly, the way only the best holidays do, drifting into quiet conversations and the soft clink of dishes being gathered. Children's laughter echoed faintly from upstairs, where Sophia and Ethan were showing their cousins their rock collection. Every giggle a small triumph against the long shadow of what this day could have been. I stood at the sink, sleeves rolled up, hands warm from soapy water, when Daniel came to my side, drying dishes with an easy rhythm. He nudged my shoulder lightly, a silent question. I smiled at him, a smile that felt like it came from somewhere deeper than my skin. Outside, night had fallen fully now, wrapping the house in a cocoon of darkness and stars. The manor stood solid and luminous against the landscape, a testament to what could be built when you stopped asking permission to exist. My phone buzzed on the counter beside me. I dried my hands, heart beating a little faster than I liked, and glanced at the screen. A text from my mother. "Your father and I have been talking. We'd like to have you and your family over for dinner next weekend if you're available." Nothing formal, just family time. I stared at it for a moment, blinking back a sudden, ridiculous sting of tears. It wasn't a perfect apology. It wasn't an acknowledgement of the years I had spent twisting myself into knots for their approval. It wasn't the sweeping reconciliation the child in me might have once dreamed of, but it was something, a reach across the chasm, a tentative hand offered. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. I typed back simply, "We'd like that. Let me check our calendar." No gushing, no pleading, no desperate eagerness to please. Just mutual respect. It felt strange and unfamiliar, and exactly right. Daniel bumped my hip gently. "Good news?" I nodded, setting the phone down carefully as if handling something fragile. "It's a start," I said. He smiled, the kind of smile that had seen me through storms I hadn't even had words for yet. "You deserve it," he said simply. We finished the dishes in companionable silence. Then I wandered into the dining room, trailing my fingers lightly across the back of the chairs, the polished wood gleaming under the soft chandelier light. This house, this family we had gathered, this life, it was mine, not given, not inherited, created. Later, upstairs, after the kids had been tucked into their beds, I stood by the window in our bedroom, looking out over the moonlit lawn. The air outside was crisp and sharp, carrying the faintest scent of wood smoke from the neighbors down the hill. Daniel came up behind me, slipping his arms around my waist, resting his chin on my shoulder. "Thinking about today?" he asked. I nodded, leaning back against him. "Thinking about how much has changed and how much hasn't." He kissed my hair. "They'll either catch up or they won't. But you're already where you're supposed to be." I closed my eyes for a moment, letting that truth sink deep into my bones. For so long, I had believed that love was something to be earned, bargained for, pleaded into existence. I had twisted myself into smaller and smaller shapes, trying to fit into a mold that was never meant for me. But not anymore. I wasn't seeking their approval anymore. I wasn't dimming myself for their comfort. I wasn't measuring my worth by their acceptance. I was living, creating, thriving. And that was enough. More than enough. As Daniel squeezed me tighter, the steady beat of his heart against my back, I opened my eyes to the silvered world beyond the window, and for the first time in a very long time I felt whole. No longer waiting for a seat at their table. I had built my own. The morning after Thanksgiving broke soft and quiet, the kind of golden stillness that feels like a held breath. Downstairs, the remnants of the celebration lingered like gentle ghosts, the extra leaf still in the dining table, a child's forgotten turkey drawing on the kitchen counter, empty glasses waiting to be gathered. I moved through the house barefoot, coffee mug in hand, savoring the way sunlight spilled across the worn oak floors we had so carefully restored. Every creak of the wood, every polished banister, every patch of faded wallpaper we'd decided to preserve, it all whispered of lives lived, of battles fought and won. This house wasn't just walls and beams. It was a testament to rebuilding, to surviving, to choosing joy even when it wasn't handed to you. Daniel was in the kitchen, making pancakes with Ethan perched on the counter offering loud, enthusiastic advice. Sophia was at the table, carefully writing thank you notes for each guest who had come the night before, her brow furrowed in solemn concentration. I paused in the doorway for a long moment, letting the sight of them soak into me. This was the family I had chosen, the one I had built, brick by imperfect brick. My phone buzzed from the kitchen island. Another text. Uncle Henry this time. Had the best time. Your home is beautiful. Thank you for reminding me what real family feels like. I smiled, heart lifting. I typed back quickly, we're grateful for you too. See you next weekend. As I set the phone down, Daniel caught my eye, flipping a slightly lopsided pancake with a grin. You okay? He asked, that easy affection threading through his voice. I nodded, stepping into the kitchen and stealing a piece of crisp bacon from the plate. More than okay, I said and meant it. Later, after breakfast, I helped Sophia and Ethan set up the guest rooms again, stripping the beds, folding fresh towels, smoothing out wrinkles in the quilts. As we worked, Sophia chattered about Christmas plans, about how she wanted Uncle Henry to have a special sign on his door so he knew he was part of our family forever. Her words hit me harder than I expected, because they were so simple, so true. Family wasn't just blood. It was choice. It was action. It was love made visible. Sophia looked up at me wide-eyed. Can we really make a sign, Mommy? I crouched down, brushing a lock of hair behind her ear. Of course we can, I whispered. We can make sure he always knows he belongs here. And maybe, just maybe, by building this space of belonging for them, for our children, I was healing the wounds I had carried for so long without even realizing it. In the afternoon, while Daniel and the kids worked on their secret holiday projects, I took a walk around the property. The air was cool, the sky washed pale blue, the lake in the distance shimmering like glass. I thought about the long road that had brought me here, about the tears, the heartbreaks, the countless Thanksgivings where I had smiled through gritted teeth, swallowing hurt for the sake of appearances. And I thought about this year, the year I had been uninvited, the year I had chosen to stop asking for a place at a table that had never truly welcomed me, the year I had built my own. I stopped at the edge of the driveway, looking back at the house, my house, with its weathered stone, its crooked chimneys, its sprawling arms stretched wide to hold everyone I loved. I didn't need their validation anymore. I didn't need to be less or quieter or easier to love. I was enough, exactly as I was. And here, in this life, with these people, I was home.